my presentation is a little bit more formal, but we'll give context to it in the long run. Inclusion is inclusion is a necessity, belonging is not inherent. How we socialize disability at the City of Richmond by me. So, the summer theme, in a traditional academic setting, this could have easily been like a thesis. But overall, after having conversations with Haya and other members of the OCS team and looking at what's been done in the past, we came to the conclusion that in order to talk about disability, we need to cultivate a culture around it. And I am very open. I'm a disability advocate. I lead my disability. Like, I always have notes on my phone because I have chronic fatigue syndrome and things like that. But also, some of my favorite things I've done this summer, I saw Lucy Dacus at the Bird a couple weeks last week. She was really cool. Fuel Pump has become my favorite little cafe in Carytown. If you get a mixed berry matcha lemonade, you won't go to sleep, but it'll change your life. I went to the observation deck for the first time. I represented Richmond, Virginia at Down the Hill, advocating for other patients with inflammatory bowel disease. We had about 7 meetings across the House and the Senate that day. I gave a presentation in DC. I am a ambassador with Color of Gastrointestinal Illnesses. They are a patient-led organization that focuses on patients of color with gastrointestinal illnesses. My presentation was called Poetry is Medicine. We rest, we write, we resist. And then when I was in DC, I'm an official social media ambassador with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. So that's like the nationwide organization that focuses on patients with inflammatory bowel disease. A lot of bathroom pictures, because that full length mirror in there is really nice. And I took a boba break when I finally broke it and went back to my favorite boba shop, also in Carytown. They got new ownership, so you guys should definitely go and support that. Before we get into that, who am I? Kaylaa. And if you don't know, I have a croc addiction, by the way. Those are the Lego ones. You know you cannot walk in them, but they're cute for a future.
I thought those were quick.
So, I'm Kaylaa. I have Crohn's disease and an ostomy. You can't really tell it because my work pants, but I have one. I'm a writer, poet, author, NYU student, RVA native. I always clarify, all of my family is from Richmond. My granddad's in the room with the camera. But I didn't go to high school or like school mainly in the city. I'm a creative. And I'm all about turning transformative moments into healing stories and making spaces for underrepresented voices. I believe that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools. We're not going to spend too much time on here, but I do like to level set. I speak about disability because it's very much my life. I would have never thought at 17 I would have to go through the health journey that I've been through, but it's shaped everything that I do. And I think once we start to have more conversations and turn like disability, accommodations into like non-taboo words and just everyday walks of life, we'll really get to a place of inclusion. But yeah, I've been through a lot in the last 6 years. What I worked on this summer. So I wrote my first press release with Jensen in the back with our guy, 2nd Street bus ball press release. To me, it was really, really important to explain what this was and what it was going to do for accessibility, and also highlight that a local artist would be doing work on that. It got picked up at ABC Channel 8, Richmond Times, and Newsbreak. And it's a very different style of writing than what I'm used to. I'm like poetry, creative, explain, hook, everything. This is like, no, get to the point and try to answer all the questions and not create spaces for questions that we don't have the answers to right now, which is really great. The second thing was my Disability Pride Month carousel. This was really important to me, one, because I follow you guys on Instagram and I follow you guys for a while, so I've seen the content that comes out around this month, and as a disability advocate, we're hyped. We're like, oh yeah, this is our month, back to back. But it was relatively quiet coming from the city, and one of the main things I wanted to figure out was why. So we wanted to focus on education because I felt like that was the issue. Even looking at comments from last year on previous posts, a lot of people thought Disability Pride Month was celebrating the LGBTQ community with a disability, which is not the case. So we broke down like a general history of the month and how it came to be. Also a call to action, what you can do. Listen to the voices of neighbors living with disabilities. Visit your local libraries and share resources. Broke down the flag and what it meant because it was actually designed by someone with a disability and revamped because the design wasn't accessible. So letting you know, just because we're speaking from this point doesn't mean we always have everything right. And that's more history. And I love my little graphics, and I was able to keep that my personal style. That was really great. I worked on an op-ed, 2-day intensive, right to change the world, bringing in my personal kind of craft and also combining it with some of those more editorial forms of writing, like the press release with Jensen, and also some things I worked on with Haya, focusing on poetry as a creative and restful care that can support patients in their chronic illness journeys. And I left that op-ed workshop with the outline draft and the resources to pursue publication and tons of notes. Like, it's insane, but really great. Also, more stuff that I worked on, real scripts with Taylor and EMS. That was really cool. We actually got to film that last week, but this was finished before last week. Introduction and planning calls with Making Space and VCU partnership for people with disabilities. You guys will hear more about Making Space coming up. The accessibility manual draft review that I got to work on with Katie, and more stuff like resources for RDOT, a disability Pride Month newsletter blurb, and an LGBTQ survey dissemination research and guide that we can kind of use further along to disseminate research when we're navigating algorithm updates and shadow banning with keywords. Kind of use that as a tool as we continue to see the landscape on social change when we're talking about topics like this that shouldn't be sensitive, but they're indeed sensitive. And back to my summer theme. So my core arguments around this is knowing that our internal culture in the city and our infrastructure shapes the city's capacity to engage with the disabled community externally. And on the next slide, you'll see more about the full scope, but we'll go over training, logistics, and public-facing resources. So I went through the pillars and analyzed where disability would kind of fall and the scope that I wanted to do with these projects that I was working on, how they would fit in. So I did this is a very condensed version of it, but mainly the strengths were that MAP's existing values, goals, and the CAO framing already offers natural entry points, equity partnership commitments, resident trust and service goals, and employee training goals. Limitations. Disability is currently invisible on MAP's language and metrics. It's not named alongside other communities. So that means that it has no dedicated tracking or training or accessibility features or equity outcomes, but we do have opportunities. The annual update cycles allow disability inclusion KPIs to be added to existing goals with minimum structure lifts and using some of the initiatives I'll speak on today as ready-made reporting hooks. A little dense, but I wanted y'all to see the research behind it. So first up, we have Making Space, one of the things that I'm leaving behind. I've had several calls with their team. I've actually used their platform as someone with a chronic illness looking for job platforms and spaces that are going to be more inclusive. So they connect neurodivergent, chronically ill, and disabled professionals with meaningful career opportunities and equips employees to engage inclusively and to build workspaces that work better for everyone. This right here, I included a screenshot from the site they sent over, but it's the Broad, it's one of the museums they work with. So from input, they do custom planning. So they use a custom 5-stage plan, 5-level accessibility maturity model. This museum is based in LA, but in 12 months, the staff comparability went from 10% to 96%, which I think is really great. Self-paced courses, live workshops, consultings, digital accessibility, and just audits up and down. The sky is kind of the limit with them when it comes to what they can do in your workspace. And the next part is gonna focus more on our transportation because I've worked so closely with Vincent over the summer. The hidden disability sunflower, it's more well known than making space. But it's a voluntary pin or lanyard that discreetly signals to staff that a rider may need extra time or support. And there's no visible disability required and no eligibility process with this. The really cool thing about it is they do have a lot of case studies on their page. I mentioned the Durham Region Transit. By training the staff, they increased public disability access, and they were able to help their community and receive equity and inclusion awards for doing so, which I think is really cool. And the Richmond International Airport already uses this system. You can go and pick up the lanyards and some of the key cards at their visitor center. And just as somebody to kind of walk you through an ostomy process when you're going to the airport, you have to rub your ostomy and then you go through these airport scanners. If you have on lotion, you'll come up as positive sometimes. And I told them, well, I'm black, I'm not gonna go outside in the lotion on summertime, that's my style. So it happened to me, but because this airport has been trained with the hidden disability sunflower, the staff already knew. I explained with the ostomy, I didn't have to go to a private room. And as a part of this community, I've heard about other people with disabilities having horror stories at airports. So I think it makes a difference. It's one of those things that are subtle, but even the small things where minor trainings that employees are able to go through, it makes a difference when it comes to comfortability levels. And my last thing, what I'm leaving behind, is an external resource building list. So my idea would be to add this list to our aging and disability website. This will be an ever expanding, ever changing list, but this is a supporting role to residents. To lease them to existing organizations, not the city originating its own disability services or messaging, because we're frankly not in a place to do that yet. We still need a lot of infrastructure built up on the back end, but I don't think our residents should have to wait for resources or dig through them. Most of these resources that I've listed or started finding are very, very broad, and some of them are even databases that lead to more resources, which is really cool. And it was stated in the Disability Pride carousel post that I showed, but more than 1 in 4 people now live with disability, and I feel like that number is ever increasing. And it's important to note that aging is not synonymous with disability. I'm 23, I will live most of my life with a disability than I've been non-disabled, and the office's page needs to be more inclusive of that. You already touched on it. Yeah, broad organizations, but really, really big impact. Of course, these things will have to be vetted a little bit more than me, but they have actual application, and really useful. And no budget approval is needed for this. This is something that can be done easily and externally and updated very frequently. I use this as a community example. I love RVA Reddit. It can go crazy in there, but you can find a lot of information. And so when I was putting together this presentation, I put in keywords like disability, resources, jobs, housing, things like that. And to summarize this story, this person has chronic pain and was looking for job opportunities that wouldn't exacerbate her symptoms. For this thread and many similar threads, looking around for resources as a Richmonder with disabilities, our Office of Aging and Disability site wasn't listed as a resource in any of them, and frankly because there's just not a lot there for somebody who is not aging and needs like resources to like live their actual life. And I think that should change. So why should we start with these 3 things? Making space, hidden sunflower, and external resources. Overall, because there's a need, I'm extremely thankful to other staff members who have shared stories with me as I've been working on this project. Their low cost, fast start, positive impact of these partnerships with Making Space and Hidden Sunflower. These aren't new organizations. They have case studies up and down their pages, and their teams are very, very responsive. Even as an intern who's communicating, I don't have the power to say yes or no or have the budget, but I'm really, really interested in bringing these resources to my team. They've been really, really receptive. And I wanted to include some in-office experiences with the elevators. a lot of people have mentioned, they close really, really fast. And I've been inhabiting the elevators with older staff, and I've noticed them use trash cans or purses or things like that to put in the space, or their body catches up to get them into the elevator. Burn calories, not electricity. I get the point. It makes sense, but this is erring in a lot of isms and obias, and there's a better way to say this exact messaging and encourage people to take the steps without turning it into a weight loss thing. Reading that, I saw this sign by chance actually. I was taking a meeting going up to the observation deck, and it reminded me of the first illness narrative I ever read, and it was titled, "I'm not lazy, I'm ill." And just how the impact of everyday words, we don't realize how they impact communities that need a little bit of support, and they know exactly how the world views them when they're asking for it. And then the last thing was this signage for April when I first came in, walk with the CAO. Now, unless you actually need people that can only physically get up and walk with their 2 feet, that also could have been worded better. When I think about this sign, it symbolizes anyone who has a means of getting from point A into point B and wants to be a part of this conversation should come out. But looking at that sign, it's just frankly not inclusive. This is the boring part for me, but it's important. Budgets, estimating time. I just wanted to, I'm not gonna get into explaining all these numbers, but wanted to show that there is various ways that you can do this. You can say, okay, we're gonna do everything and drop it in the bag. Or you can say, hey, let's test this out, and see how working with the organization on a smaller scope works, and seeing if we want to build this out. This is a combination of making space and the hidden disability sunflower. But I'm young, and I know a lot of people will tell me, you pay for what you get, and I think that'll be the same sentiment working with these orgs. So that was a lot of information. I told you I was gonna be slightly different, but just to summarize, the first phase was immediate resident support, getting out those external resources. Phase 2 is engaging the organizations like Making Space and the Hidden Disability Sunflowers. Phase 3 will obviously be making all the findings and the processes from those organizations public, and showing the public what we're doing in response to the issues they've stated, and then explaining the impact. There's also opportunities within both organizations to encourage people that connect with the organizations to embrace their tools. And I also left a point for community activation, which is other stuff that I was finding looking through social media posts and Reddit threads. When we're talking about accessibility, stuff that comes up a lot is sidewalks and parking. And I understand why those things aren't immediate fixes, but I also don't think the public understands why those things aren't immediate fixes. So it goes to that level of just transparency and storytelling. How do we tell, yeah, we understand, we hear you guys, but this is what has to happen in order for these things to change, or this is the process that we're working on for those things to change. And if you go looking for it, I'm pretty sure you'll find it, but it just has to do with that accessibility lens and how it needs to be a little bit more out there. Guidelines for making historical sites accessible. A lot of people in the city have buildings and houses that were deemed historical, so they don't know what to do when it comes to maybe adding a detachable wheelchair ramp, or making a little side entrance that technically people can get to, but it's not deemed the entrance for that building. So making those guidelines a little bit more accessible, and then making platforms and groups designed to allow our community members with disabilities to be heard. I saw a lot of this when I was doing research, similar to what Holder and Gabby mentioned with looking at other municipalities that are doing things well. So you see a lot of mayor's office for people with disabilities and monthly focus groups that focus on hearing from that community. And my favorite moment of the summer was the Business of Filmmaking interview with producer BK Fulton and Matt Skills that West invited me to. That was super cool as a poet, as someone who loves music, being able to listen to them talk and then making that connection at the end of it. I know for sure I'm gonna remember it for a very, very long time. So what am I up to? I'm always around creating something. I'll be back at school in the fall, but I love concerts, media, storytelling, so I'm always covering those things on my own socials. I was recently published one of my poems in a magazine that focuses on patients with inflammatory bowel disease, so that was really cool. And I also have a media club that I'm working on that just platforms the stories of people living with chronic illnesses and disabilities. So, yeah, that's my first book that I published my senior year of high school, by the way. I always forget to like plug that in, but she's out there in the world. And yeah, that's me.